So for tonight's Q&A, we are very fortunate to have the filmmaker Mary Harron, who directed Daliand, and very excited to hear your feedback on some of the questions I have, because it's such an interesting film. And thank you for joining us tonight, Mary.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So my first question is, well, it leads with an observation and then leads into a question. So two of your central roles are, on the one hand, an extraordinarily well-known, incredibly talented veteran actor in Sir Ben Kingsley, knighted no less, and a newcomer and in another central role. And the way you direct each of these roles and each of these actors, I would think, I'm not a director myself, but I would think that you're using very different skill sets and you have to switch gears. Is this a fair assumption, or do you direct all actors the same, or do you use very different muscles as you collaborate with actors of such staggeringly different levels of experience?
You know, it's interesting because I mean, I'm sure I must vary it according to someone's experience. I mean, and also, you know, a very experienced and famous actor, they work differently, you know, however famous and experienced they are. Some people need a lot of attention, some people don't, some people want to talk a lot on set. But really, my approach is always, which is really all about casting. I mean, the most important things that I do are all in the casting process, about casting the right person. So I spend an awful lot of time on that. And the casting process is usually dragged out over years. And I think I was just incredibly lucky with Ben Kingsley that we went, and he loved the script. He signed on, he read it on a plane and called his agent from after the plane touched down to say he wanted to do it. So you know, it's great when you start with you know, a sort of real, you know, a passion for it, enthusiasm. But then when we were, and then it took ages to get the financing and to sort out his schedule. But then when we were getting in the build up to making it, he invited me to stay at his house in the country, in the English countryside. And I went and stayed there for 2 days and 2 nights, and more like 3 days, I guess. And we went through, apart from walking around his beautiful gardens, we went through the script from beginning to end and sat through and discussed every scene. I mean, certainly every scene that he was in. And we just talked, and that's really my process in recent years. I did that with Matt Smith, with 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀. You know, we really, you know, we talked some on the phone, but then we had one big session in the lobby of his, you know, sitting having tea in the lobby of his hotel room, where we went through every scene. And it's the same thing. I mean, this was a longer process with Sir Ben, but we talked through it. I said, you know, this is what I think's happening in it. You know, do you want to talk about, you know, what you feel about this scene, or where we think Dali is in this scene, and in this very simple page by page process. A lot of questions come up about the character and what we're doing, and both of our attitudes to it, and we're able to iron out some things about how we feel about the character. And I thought he would have a lot of notes, you know, and I thought that was one reason why I was coming to visit, was that he would have a lot of script notes. But his script, he has enormous respect for. He loved, the script was written by my husband, John Walsh, and he loved the script. So he had a lot of respect for it. So I thought, instead of all the notes I thought I was going to get, they're really very small. They were just like little bits of phrasing and little bits of dialogue. But he said one thing. He said, after we've done this and we've gone through it and we agree on everything, you cannot change the script. Because him learning the script, the process of learning the script is his kind of meditation, or his almost religious process of getting into the character, which is a little difficult for me, because not his process, but normally I change things. You know, you're in rehearsal, you say, how does that line work? Let's get rid of it. Or it's a research-based script. And so John and I were still talking about the character and reading about it. And so a couple times in the build up to making the film, I had to, okay, I'm just going to steel myself. I'm going to write to him and say, look, I found something, or John found something, a bit of research, this bit of dialogue, I think we have to put this in. I know you said not to change anything. So a couple times, and I said, oh, and then while we were about to shoot, I said, there's this song, when we were researching the film, that we met this man who'd been a child, the child of one of Dali's servants, who used to hang around Dali's studio, and Dali used to hum this song. And do you mind learning it? And the next day he said, Mary thinks I can do anything. Meaning, she's throwing this thing. But of course, right. He learned it perfectly. He did it all perfectly. And then really, he's a sort of actor. He arrived on set with the character, having done a very deep dive. I gave him video, it's Salvador Dali, there's tons of footage. There's a billion documentaries. So I arrived with a sort of pile of documentaries. And I said, do you want anybody to, to voice coach her? And he says, no, I can do the accent on my own, which he certainly could. But, he studied him. He was particularly taken with a documentary, with an interview that Dali did for Spanish television, where he was not performing as, a lot of what we know of as Salvador Dali is performance, is a very kind of heightened, very exaggerated. He would exaggerate his Spanish accent, his gestures. It was almost caricature. And I think that he made a decision, that is not what I'm going to do. Some people will be disappointed. They want to see more of the public image. But I think for Ben, he wanted to see the real man, the serious artist, the private man.
Right. Not
the clown. And then occasionally you'll see him putting on the clown or the mask.
Right.
Because a lot of it's about a mask or a persona.
Right.
And then in private, there's a kind of quieter, different person.
Right. Yeah, that's actually one thing that I found quite interesting about my experience of the of learning about, Dali and his sort of day-to-day life, the work, his dynamic with his wife and so on, that he would do these pendulum swings from, confidence and arrogance incarnate to, this like almost childlike, fragile, insecure boy, and
yes, shivering on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the image that's popping into my head right now, when he's being such a baby about his cut. And, really that's actually a really great, that moment's a really great foil for demonstrating how babyish he can be, when in the right circumstances, and, needing the attention and needing the reassurance to, his own, ostensibly genuine belief in his own genius, and that contrast, and, just sort of thinking like, wow, the human psyche is really, quite a roiling cauldron of contradictions, so but I thought that's what made the the character interesting to spend time with, and also just so fascinating to see Ben Kingsley go for it with this.
Oh yeah, no, he'll go for it.
Yes.
Yeah. It's funny because I think a lot of actors were scared of playing Dali, but I think John and I knew that if you've played Gandhi, there's not going to be much.
Right.
You can play a genius, and he's not scared of playing a real life, great man. But what I liked was that he played also the not great man. Because Dali was in many ways, he's a terrible coward. He ran away from the Spanish Civil War. He betrayed. He was not he was a noble artist, but he wasn't a noble person. He sort of epitomized the difference between courage and art and like cowardice in your daily life, which he was like.
Yeah, that's well put. Because he was obviously so dependent on those around him, but he was, so hot and cold, and so mercurial with how he would dispense his favor, and he would at least as it's represented in the film and the screenplay, he would bring people into his fold, and then with so much vigor, and then reject them with just as much force. It was really kind of sad when he rejects James, at the
yes, because it's like a court, and you're in, and
right.
then the inner circle,
Right.
then you're out.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Sir Ben just said in the New York Times yesterday, I think he was interviewed about that, and he said it was about someone having such tremendous confidence and such tremendous fear at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he had which is something that maybe we all. What I love about the story is that these are things that we all have in a sort of smaller way, maybe. Like we all sort of think we're great at one point, and then I'm pathetic. I mean, everyone has these shifts. Everyone is frightened of death. Everyone is worried about aging, but not in this epic level that Salvador Dali was scared of. It was a sort of consuming or a almost romantic or sort of everything was on a big scale, including his fears.
Right. Yeah.
Enjoyment of things, his belief in art, his terrors. Was kind of go for broke. So you had these two enormous personality, and then Barbara Sakova, who is a very great European actress who plays his wife Gala, and Barbara's hugely revered in theater and sort of art cinema in Europe, but she was much more like not casual, but she worked with Fassbinder. That's how she started in the movies. And she said, I worked with Fassbinder. And for the Fassbinder, you got one take. He gave you one take. So don't worry about me. So that I went and had tea with her, and we went through every scene and gave her research, because, it's great when you can give people, but there's much less on Gala. There's no footage of her almost at all. So we just talked a lot about the character, talked around about it. But Barbara, whereas Ben would he would maintain this tremendous concentration on set. And you would had to be, you did, and the only thing you really had to do was sort of make sure that it was quiet and there was nothing distracting, because I think he has a real kind of like I say, almost religious, like meditative. And he said to me, again, of the things apart from don't change the script, it was, when I get there, and it was good because it makes life much easier if an actor says, this is what I need.
Right.
That's what you want. You don't want to sort of suddenly discover. I think if an actor really knows themselves, they will tell you what they need. And he said, I have to have at the beginning of the day all the props and costume and wardrobe pieces for that day of filming. Because when I put it on, and I need the walking stick, I need the glasses, I need everything there. When I put that on, then I become him. Barbara was less concerned about that. Barbara said to me, because she will try, with Ben, really there was, he would arrive with that, he'd do the scene and then it was kind of there, but then I would say, well, just try something different, and he said, you can do that. He said, if, at the end of if you think you've got what you want and we have time, just say play and I'll try something different. So we would do play quite a bit when I had time. And what Barbara said to me was, I'll probably do it too big the first time. I'll do too much, or, and I tell Margareta von Totta, just, take me down, and she said that to me. I said, okay, I'll tell you to do, which is what the biggest thing I say to actors anyway. I just say two things. I say, take it down, smaller and faster. I say this throughout all day, every day of filming.
Right. That's interesting.
Speed it up, do less.
Right.
Which I never had to say actually to Ben. I never had to ask him to speed it up or do, he kind of would, but at the same time, it was also very fun to work with Barbara, where you're kind of improvising more and sort of finding it more.
Mm-hmm.
They're both great ways to work. They're just different ways to work, but they work well together.
Right. That's so interesting to think about how you're accommodating. No, you're directing, but you're also by virtue of working with such a big cast on a film like this, adapting to the different acting styles and trying to get the best out of each of them that way.
Yeah, because I mean, everybody needs something different,
Yeah.
I mean, with Chris Briney, who plays James, he had never acted professionally. I found him on a website,
I read that in the press notes. I was really stunned. Like, so this is literally the beginning of he's at the very beginning of his professional career. Qualified beginning is across from Ben Kingsley.
Yes, and being the lead in a movie, where you're never seen.
Imagine his good fortune. It's amazing.
But because the actor was going to play James dropped out a week into prep, so I suddenly had to find an actor, and I said to the casting director, I don't want anyone. I'd lost a number of actors because there's so much streaming. We were filming in lockdown. People were taking streaming projects that were paying well. I said, I'm not losing another actor to Netflix. Let me look at the drama schools, because I really should have somebody very young. This character should be really young, early 20s, 21, 22. And so he said, well, you're lucky because of the pandemic, because of lockdown, all the drama schools have put their showcases online. So I started at A and had worked my way down to P, looking at hundreds of people.
Right.
And then and really had found nobody. I had a short list that was so small, really nobody. And then I saw Chris Briney's photograph, and I said to my husband, there's no way he's going to be any good.
Right.
He just looks too perfect. It just would be too good. And then, of course, I watched some of his stuff. He's actually good. And then he sent in a taped reading, and it was fantastic. He was this character. Like, he had the right. Casting's very specific, and in this case, he had to have a certain look that was not just sort of beautiful. Because when Dali says, "Oh, are you Raphael?" Not boy, not girl. It has to be someone who's masculine, but also with sort of beautiful and like that. That way
too.
Was that
with innocence? Yes.
Yes, which he definitely, innocence and yet smart. Not a pushover.
Yeah.
He had a certain sort of gravity to him, and he said, I am James. I feel I am James. And he was really lovely to talk to, and I felt he had a lot of grace as a person and sort of depth. And he had never been to Europe.
Wow.
So his first trip to Europe.
What an experience for this kid.
Yeah, he'd never been really, he'd been to Canada, he had never been to Europe or anywhere else. And so his first trip was getting a plane to Liverpool to be in this film, and I think that he felt every day, I don't think I realized until I talked to him later, after we'd finished shooting, how terrifying it was for him.
Right. So
there's that, that scene when the dinner party, he just said he was just so terrified.
Right.
Yeah.
So, speaking of James and his character, and we can make this the last question. So, speaking of his character, he's, from what I understand, he's the only lead character who is fictionalized. Most of the other characters, if not all of them, are historical figures. People, down to Amanda Lear, of course, who's an interesting one. So, in terms of the blending of fact and fiction, I was really interested in the subplot of the, I don't know how to describe it, the forgery or the quasi forgery. I don't know how you're much closer to the material, how would you describe it as forgery or forgery light or forgery-esque behavior?
It's fraudulent, but it wasn't the act of signing a blank piece of paper with your signature is not fraudulent. And there was a whole period when he was signing these pieces of paper, and they would be given to somebody reputable, and they would make lithographs from them. But when they began to be dealt with by people who were disreputable, then they would not make proper lithographs. a lithograph would be an assigned series of like 40 copies or 100 copies. Instead, they would just print 1,000, and they would not be printing a proper lithograph. It would be more like a high quality Xerox. And so for thousands of dollars, it would be worth a few dollars. So that was fraud. Dali was not directly involved with that. He didn't tell anyone to do that. They were guilty, both him and 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀, and certainly Captain Moore were guilty of extreme negligence and turning a blind eye, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the money was pouring in. I mean, with Dali, the money was pouring in, so he didn't look closely. Isn't it wonderful? I can make $1,000 by signing a piece of paper.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually interested to do some further research on that. I found some information online, but I thought, like, okay, as you were just saying, like, at minimum, this feels like negligence, but to what degree is it, arguably, was it criminal, or was he just sort of flooding his own market in a way that probably ended up, undermining his own value and the value of his work in the long run, I suspect. But I'm curious to read up more about that. And I thought it was interesting that sort of you and John, your husband and screenwriter, that there were those breadcrumbs left at the beginning of the film when he's learning about the difference between a print and a lithograph, and then that subplot really kicks in Act 3, and sort of like, okay, this is coming full circle. I thought that was interesting in terms of the structure, because it's very front loaded in terms of establishing place and character, and then I felt like the plot really kicked in the third act. And in terms of, actually one last question, and then I'll let you go, is 3 of the films that I know of yours the best, your first film, I Shot Andy Warhol, American Psycho, and then Daliand, they're all very much tied to New York City. And you have this sort of gritty version in your first film, I Shot Andy Warhol, this sort of, hyper materialist hellscape in American Psycho, and then this sort of romanticized sort of, bon vivant uptown of Daliand. And is that more a way into the story, or are you sort of like looking to experience different facets of New York as well, or does it all sort of come together?
When the project came to us, it was about Dali in the 70s, and it was this, and I really loved the idea of who knew that I didn't know Salvador Dali was around and going to Studio 54, or hanging out with Alice Cooper and like part of the 70s, because you have this image of him. Our image of him is fixed in the 1930s, I think, with all the great surrealist paintings, and he was doing, holograms of Alice Cooper. And
that was news to me too. I was very interested to learn that.
Yeah. And to me, I was young. I came to New York young in 75, and had this wonderful sort of 3 years in New York, magical sort of time. And I remembered this feeling of being really young in New York at that point. And if you could meet people and they would like invite you to some party, you didn't, even if you were young, and it's probably unthreatening, and like, come with us, come on the merry-go-round, and you would find yourself invited to places and suddenly things happening to you. And it's something to do with being very young and new in the city. And I thought I'd love to capture that experience of someone who steps on the merry-go-round. Right. And then, and happens to meet their idol. And then, as often happens when you meet your idol, it's not all simple. It's not at all, there's the sort of magic of, I think when you're very young, you're so dazzled by the famous people you've heard about and their greatness, and they're not almost like real people to you. And gradually, as you get to know them as real people, their flaws and their humanity emerges.
Right.
And I think I wanted to illustrate that, both the bittersweetness of that, the good and the bad, and getting on the merry-go-round, but also that at the end, it was very important for me to show that, I think for me, James seeing King's, Dali on the rocks conducting the wind is like, well, there was good, there was bad, but I'm glad I knew him. Dali and Gala in some ways are monsters, they're kind of like sacred monsters. They're kind of wild, kind of in some ways grotesque characters, but they're also very human and kind of amazing. Yeah. And the world is bigger. I want to say James's life is bigger for having known Salvador Dali.
Yes. Yeah, no, that really shines through. I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I was thinking about it, I was like, wow, there's so many layers and there's so much complexity, and it's such a for a film that's really a character portrait and a quite focused window of time. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot that's clearly serving multiple purposes in terms of revealing who he is, and as a character overall. So I really thought it was such an interesting watch.
Yeah, and also youth and age, really, and
yes.
I mean, I was interested.
Yes.
In of course we have flashbacks, but the aging artist looking back,
Yeah.
in the company of a young man, which
the foils for each other. Yeah. It was really interesting. So thank you so much, Mary, for your time. And I'm really excited to share this Q&A with the film club. And I wish you the best of luck with the opening, June 9th.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yes, yeah. So I'll be curious to see how it does. But great luck with everything, and thank you again.
I will. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for inviting me.